My opponent and I agree that not only should same-sex marriage be legal, but that queer couples should get the rights associated with marriage, such as hospital visitation laws and the ability to adopt children. I wouldn't go so far as to say that banning queer couples from adopting is a genocide on par with the Holocaust, but I can see that my opponent understands that these children would be happier in a home with same-sex marriage than to become wards of the state. However, my opponent and I do disagree on language, and that gets to the heart of this debate: inclusion. My opponent used the words gay marriage. Same-sex marriage is often used interchangeably with gay marriage, of which the latter is a less inclusive word and implies only gay men and women, and not other sexual minorities, like bi or pansexual people. It also leaves out gender identity minorities on the transgender spectrum. As evidenced by my opponent's choice of words, the public does not understand the difference, and thus the queer community needs to focus on an issue more obviously inclusive of the entire gender and sexual minority community, and not just LGBT people. Thus, the queer community should focus on passing the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, or the ENDA, a bill which would prohibit discrimination based upon sexual orientation and gender identity, rather than getting all the states to legalize same-sex marriage for 3 reasons. First, the institution of marriage is less of a lifetime milestone in recent years, but employment is currently a pressing issue. Second, fighting for same-sex marriage alienates many members of the community. And third, the queer community has already won the battle for same-sex marriage, and shifting the public's focus towards the NDA would give the push it needs to become law. I will start with a discussion on the decline of American marriage. According to the National Census Bureau, in 1970, 74% of Americans are married, but in 2010, that number has dropped to 54%. According to The Economist, many Americans would like to marry, but simply don't have the money. Because marriage is so strongly tied to economics, the queer community should focus on allowing its members chances to get and maintain jobs by lobbying for the ENDA. The National Survey of Family Growth found that 24% of sexual minority women live in poverty, compared to 19% of their straight counterparts. The transgender population fares even worse, with 26% of trans people surveyed by the National Center for Transgender Equality as being fired for being trans. It is obvious that queer people should focus more on helping less fortunate members of the community than securing marriage rights for those that want it. The ENDA would not solve all employment and financial problems that the queer community faces, but it would give the queer community more legal leverage with which to fight discrimination. Additionally, same-sex marriage does not include the entire scope of people who identify in the queer community. In terms of transgender people, same-sex marriage can refer to those whose legal gender and sex do not match, but date those of the same sex, or it can refer to those whose gender and sex do not match, but date those of the same gender. Either way, the fact is that inclusion of transgender people is incidental and not planned, and transgender people are not the only people in the queer community who are left behind in the same-sex marriage debate. Intersex people would benefit more from the ENDA. Intersex being, to quote the Intersex Society of North America, a general term used for a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to typically fit definitions of male or female. Intersex people have a chance of being counted under gender identity minorities, although this hasn't been legally tested. While many intersex people do not identify as members of the queer community, the two communities do have many needs in common, and the larger queer rights movement tends to leave out intersex people. For instance, the website of the Human Rights Campaign, the largest queer rights organizing group in the country, yields almost 20,000 on-site results if you search the word gay, but only 8 for the word intersex. Supporting the passing of the ENDA would not only affect more people in a positive way, but it would send a powerful message of inclusion towards those that are often forgotten in the same-sex marriage debates. And the final reason that the queer rights movement should primarily fight for the ENDA is because same-sex marriage debate is basically won. Just ask Jim Daly, the CEO of the Focus on the Family, an evangelical nonprofit who focuses primarily on defining marriage as a traditional union between a man and a woman. When asked about the status of the same-sex marriage battle, Daly stated in a Christian newspaper, quote, "We've probably lost that one." Now, we need to focus the public shift on the ENDA while there is still momentum in the media surrounding queer rights. According to the Center for American Progress, 9 out of 10 Americans think the ENDA already exists, and there is overwhelming support for it. It would be foolish to let this moment pass and not allow the ENDA to gain the attention that it needs to easily become a law.